Welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Andrew Kraft. As we approach the top of the next hour, I want to kind of move into some more of these international headlines, especially regarding so many of these geopolitical crises and world conflicts, including, first up, the war between Russia and Ukraine. Well, President Trump saying yesterday that the United States would resume providing Ukraine with arms to help it withstand Russian attacks after months of trying without success to draw Moscow into negotiations on ending the war. This coming after there was seemingly some type of unilateral move at the Pentagon to pause military shipments indefinitely to Ukraine here. Well, our friend and colleague Fox's Jillian Turner has more. Let's listen.
We wanted to put defensive weapons because Putin is not treating human beings right. He's killing too many people.
President Trump is putting Russian President Vladimir Putin on blast. This time, the president sounding off during a cabinet meeting at the White House.
We get a lot of thrown at us by Putin, for you want to know the truth. He's very nice all the time, but it turns out to be meaningless.
President Trump is upset over stalled ceasefire negotiations to end the war in Ukraine. As he pushes for peace talks, the Trump administration reversed course on a pause of critical weapons deliveries to Kyiv on Monday. The Pentagon releasing a statement reading in part, quote, "At President Trump's direction, the Department of Defense is sending additional defensive weapons to Ukraine to ensure the Ukrainians can defend themselves while we work to secure a lasting peace and ensure the killing stops."
This will demonstrate to Vladimir Putin that the United States is not going to force Ukraine to surrender, and that he ought to come to the table and negotiate a peaceful resolution to this conflict and stop killing Ukrainian kids.
Along with resuming arms transfers, the president also floated possible sanctions against Russia's oil industry. Pressure to get Moscow to the negotiating table comes as South Korean intelligence reports Russia may now be beefing up its own troops with North Korean recruits. The report cites up to 30,000 more troops from North Korea. They could be deployed as early as this month. With peace talks still stalled, Ukraine remains dependent on U.S. and European military aid. At the State Department, Jillian Turner, Fox News.
Jillian, thanks so much. So how does something like that happen without the president's knowledge? That's going to be my first question. Let's bring into the conversation here our friend and colleague, national security analyst and expert, and retired Marine intelligence officer, Hal Kempfer. Hal, so good of you to be with us here, and it's good to see you. I want to read from the report today in the Wall Street Journal and then ask you that question. They said this: Trump told Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in a telephone call on Friday that he was not responsible for the halt in weapons shipments in Kyiv. According to people briefed on that conversation, Trump said he had directed a review of Pentagon munitions stockpiles after the U.S. struck Iran nuclear sites last month, but that Trump had not ordered the department to freeze the arms deliveries here. And remember, this kind of all trickled out. It was first reported that this was being done because the Pentagon was worried about our own stockpiles of these munitions, of these defense systems here. The president saying he didn't make this call. He wasn't even aware of it. How does that happen? So if Trump didn't authorize this, who did and why?
Andrew, I have to tell you, with something this high profile, it just boggles the mind that they would turn off something that important, and that the president wouldn't have ordered it at some point. But the only theory I've really heard is that somebody either misinterpreted what was coming from the White House, or maybe jumped the gun and thought that what they had asked for was some sort of coded message to shut off or find a reason to shut off arms shipments going to Ukraine. And what's come out of that is that a number of officials, officially or unofficially, have come up and said, we're not running out of those numbers. At least we're not low on our inventories any more than we were a few months ago. So there was nothing immediate or crucial why we had to shut those off. Poland came out and said the stuff was all ready to go into Ukraine. It was already loaded up, ready to go in, cross the border into Ukraine. So it really was somewhat befuddling as to what exactly was the rationale for shutting this down. And again, I kind of go back to the only thing I've really heard is that some Pentagon officials, I don't know if that involves Secretary Hegseth, but some Pentagon officials may have decided that they would just take the initiative and pursue what they thought was the direction that the White House wanted to go.
So,
And so what President Trump is saying is potentially accurate in that he may not have directed them explicitly to shut down the arms shipments, but he may
okay.
have said something where they interpreted that that was his intent.
I mean, Hal, I don't think it's news to our viewers, and I know it's not news to you, that there are competing philosophies about, especially the U.S. response to the war in Ukraine within the Trump administration. Do you see that playing out in this story at all? Could you see that as a scenario where you have one camp here who may not be as into or for U.S. support for the war in Ukraine, taking matters into their own hands against the other camp that wants to see Ukraine succeed and win this war with U.S. help?
I think that was the subtext.
Okay.
I think that's what it was, is they were saying that there were some within, and I didn't get the impression that this was a uniformed decision or anything like that. It was the appointed officials that were in there, that some of them may have just been part of that philosophy, if you will, that we've sent too much to Ukraine, that we need to look to our own needs first. You know, one of the things that Ukraine complained about greatly was a massive diversion of air defense missiles to Israel, that was, tied to its war with Iran. And those missiles should have gone, or were supposed to go to Ukraine instead. Of course, Ukraine has just been taking phenomenal hits from drones and missiles coming into Kyiv and other major cities. So they really wanted those missiles to come in. Well, the air defense missiles were one of the first things that were noted when they said they're stopping shipments going in. So there may have been some broader subtext here. They may have been looking at China and looking at what's going on in the Pacific. And as you know, I just got back from that region, so I can certainly empathize with concerns of what could happen in the South China Sea and the West Pacific. But all said, there didn't seem to be any exigent thing that suddenly popped up as to why they shut down the arms shipments.
But Hal, though, throughout the course of this war, that has been a concern amongst the U.S. defense industrial base, those at the Pentagon and the national security firmament, that we're using too much of our munitions stockpiles. A lot of going to Ukraine, a lot of going to Israel. And so that has been, you and I have discussed that. It's been a concern throughout this war.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a huge drawdown. One of the things that really languished, and this is really going back to the drawdown at the end of the Cold War, the peace dividend, if you will, was it really slowed down the defense industrial base, the production. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Great Britain in the 1950s. It wasn't that they stopped producing things, they just stopped producing things in sufficient quantities to really keep their defense industrial base in good working order. Well, that was what we're seeing with the United States, and there'd been a lot of discussion for a very long time. I can tell you this goes back to the war on terror in the early days after 9/11, that we needed to basically reinvigorate the defense industrial base, but we had not done that. Some of the areas like shipbuilding, that's a big part of the big beautiful bill budget, is that shipbuilding is being highlighted and has a huge chunk of money that's going towards it. Well, that's part of that whole thing with trying to get that going. So that's a legit concern. I mean, there is a lot of legit reasons for that. We're drawing down for Ukraine, then we got pulled back into the Middle East, and we're drawing down for that. And everyone's saying, look, we've got to build up our inventories in the Pacific and Europe and elsewhere. And so that's legitimate. But I kind of go back to it. The particular trigger thing for this just wasn't quite panning out as originally articulated.
Hal, live picture there at the White House. Lest we forget, there is no permanent national security advisor right now. Marco Rubio is in an acting interim role as the national security advisor. And I have to ask, if there were a permanent national security advisor, would this have not happened? Remember, he or she is kind of the liaison between the cabinet agencies and the cabinet secretaries coordinating policy like this.
I can't say with perfect omniscience that if there was a dedicated national security advisor, this wouldn't have happened. It really is personality dependent who is that national security advisor. But I will say it is far, far less likely that something like this would happen. You know, what's interesting is Marco Rubio's dual hatting, triple hatting, depending on which day you seem to catch him. But he's filling that role. And the reports initially were that Marco Rubio was caught completely off guard by this Pentagon decision. And that could have been, and you know, I've been in government or working, not in government now, obviously, but I've worked in government for a very long time. And I have worked overseas a long time, and I will tell you that sometimes the State Department and the Department of Defense aren't completely in sync, if you know what I mean. And I'm wondering if the fact that he's dual hatted with that position in the White House, that there might have been some interdepartmental friction there or something like that that stopped that from getting to him wearing his other hat as the national security advisor.
Hal, lastly, I got to ask you, are we seeing some type of change in posture, tone, rhetoric about how Trump approaches Zelensky and how Trump approaches Putin? You heard there in that soundbite in Jillian Turner's report what Trump said about Putin today at his cabinet meeting. He said this: "We get a lot of bull ass thrown at us from Putin. If you want to know the truth," he said, quote, "he's very nice all the time, but it turns out to be meaningless." What say you, Hal?
Well, the problem I think that Donald Trump has always had is that Putin has been very nice to him going back well before he got involved with politics. You know, he's got a personal relationship with him. And I think he may have put I'll go out on a limb here. He put a little too much stock in that personal relationship when he was saying he was going to be able to stop this war as quickly as he'd anticipated that he was going to. And of course, it has not worked out. And the other thing I would say is he's getting a lot of pushback, a lot of feedback, if you will, from not just, you know, Democratic members of Congress, but within his own party, that Putin's been essentially playing him. And I say that because President Trump has actually said in so many words that I think he said Putin was tapping him along, which is another way of saying he was playing him. And certainly at this point, numerous leaders from around the world have made it very clear that they were going to communicate that, and I'm assuming they did, to President Trump, that Putin was playing him. And everything he sees, you know, he has a nice conversation with Putin, and the very next day you see the largest onslaught of drones and missiles in the history of the 3-year war. And at some point you realize, yeah, this just isn't getting through. Now, I'm going to say what others have said. That's great you say that. It's, you know, it's good you've had this revelation. Put it into action. If you say you're going to put sanctions on Russia with oil, then do it. Don't just say, you know, he's saying that. I mean, I'm kind of not.
It has not been done yet.
It has not been done yet, and that's where there is a frustration with a number of national security analysts out there saying, okay, that's great. It's, you know, glad to hear you've kind of figured out what Putin's all about, but let's put this into real action. I think part of it, turning that back on and turning it back on the way he did, was rather interesting. By the way, if I could just say one thing, defensive weapons. I have heard this for decades. We're only going to send defensive weapons. Is that a defensive rifle or an offensive rifle? Is that a defensive artillery round or an offensive, you know? And I always love that parsing of words.
Yeah, I mean,
you know,
the formulation of that was also used during the Biden administration when speaking about shipments of weapons to Israel for use in their war against Hamas. Hal, lastly here, speaking of negotiations, bringing conflicts to a close, to an end, where are the negotiations? Where's the deal-making going on right now between Russia and Ukraine? You'll remember in the spring there was a flurry of activity. Parties were meeting for the first time during the course of this war, and now nothing, right?
It's pretty morbid. There are discussions, there is some communication, but you don't see any grand gestures, you don't see any big U.S. proposals, and I think that's because the U.S. kind of made its best proposal, if you will, for a ceasefire. And Putin, in so many words, thumbed his nose. You know, he basically, made a bunch of like, we agree in principle, which is a famous way that, politicians say, we don't agree with any of this and we're not going to go along with it. It's just a way of saying it without saying no directly. and then he just played, played the U.S., if you will, for this, and of course nothing happened. And we're not going to put out another grand proposal because we kind of have a sense, and I think you heard the president say that today, of where Putin's position is. By the way, I would say over the last few weeks, Putin has gone right back into his maximalist language.
Yeah.
Ukraine needs to be part of Russia. I mean, there is no nuanced discussion there about where this can go.
Okay.
And so at that point, we're right back where we started, and there's not much going on there.
All right. Hal Kempfer, we're going to leave it at that. So good to see you, Hal. We'll talk soon.